Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of our DCSWA Professional Development Month panels. Today, we're discussing writer-editor relationships. I'm Carolyn Wilke. I'm the moderator for this panel. And I just want to say thank you for joining us. There's just a lot of trauma right now. And in spite of it all, I'm grateful for our community and that we can have this conversation. And I know that everyone can't make it today, but this panel is being recorded, and so we're working on the plans for how to share it. Before we get started, we want to get a sense of who's in the room with us for this conversation. So you'll see a poll come up asking you about where you fit along the writer-editor spectrum. Go ahead and fill that out. Okay. All right, and then a little bit about me. I'm a staff writer at Science News for Students. And this topic, navigating writer and editor relationships, is something that I am super interested in. So on staff, I've had a lot of relationships with editors that have had their own character and quirks. So the relationships, but maybe the editors as well. And so soon I'll be going freelance, and I expect that my relationships with editors will change a lot. But on staff or not, it's clear to me that having good relationships with editors is just important to a successful writing career. So as most writers and editors can attest, these relationships are sometimes tricky, and there's a power dynamic to be sure. And these days we're interacting more online, so that presents its own challenges. So what do good writer-editor relationships look like, and what can we do to improve these interactions? To get at some answers, we have a lineup of stellar science editors and writers. So before we get to the panel discussion, I need to mention a few things. So first, please abide by the code of conduct that was printed on the title slide. Please be respectful, and anyone who does not will be removed from this event. And then questions. So we really want to hear from you throughout the event. So if you have a question, if something comes up, just drop it into the chat window, and I or my co-host, freelance writer and DCSWA board member, Tian Nguyen, will see it, and those questions will help guide our discussion. Okay, so now I'm gonna look at these poll results. There are 37 people here, and of that, 56% are freelance writers and 31% are staff writers at universities or institutions. So there's also some staff writers in journalism and a few other categories as well. So you can all see those results. Oh, I'm gonna end this now, sorry. I think now you can see the results. Sorry, that's a new feature for me. But there you go. So about half the people here are freelance writers. So Gabe, I hope you'll have a lot to share with them. Anyways, now to our panelists. So we have two editors, a staff writer and a freelance writer. I will have them all introduce themselves and tell us a key ingredient for good writer-editor relationships. So let's start with Lauren Morello.
Hi, I'm Lauren Morello. I'm a deputy healthcare editor at Politico. And before that, I spent several years as the US news editor at Nature. Carolyn, am I supposed to give my ingredient now?
Yeah.
Okay. I know this sounds simple, but I think kind of the bedrock of a good writer-editor relationship, whether you're staff or you're freelance, is communication, because as an editor, I feel like it's hard to address problems unless I know they're there. And sometimes there's really no other way unless a reporter brings them up. So I'd say, I think a lot of times, especially freelance reporters, worry that they're somehow bothering an editor that they're working with by asking for advice or help or just trying to clarify something about the deadline or the assignment or whatever. And I'm here to say that we're busy, but we're not scary, and you should ask us.
Yeah, thanks. And now we'll go to Lauren Wolf. So we'll do our two editors and then our two writers.
Great. So I'm Lauren Wolf. I am the science desk editor at Chemical and Engineering News, where I manage science coverage for the magazine, about 10 staff members, including some multimedia reporters. And my ingredient, I tried to pick something that I didn't think everybody else was going to talk about, but I think, you know, we all know what the golden rule is: treat others the way you'd like to be treated. But I think I heard this once at a management seminar where they said you should actually treat others the way they want to be treated. And so I think that's really important both for the writer and the editor. You know, on the editor side, it's important to have an idea of what's going on in your writer's life, what they've got on their plate. Don't just assume that they can drop what they're doing to, you know, be at your beck and call. And the same thing on the writer's side. And I think just making sure you ask the person how they like to be communicated with, and you know, what their preferred mode of that is. I think all of those things are really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Definitely have a lot to talk about communication. And Gabe, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Gabe Popkin. I'm a freelance writer in the DC area. Definitely second what both Lauren said. I absolutely live in fear of bothering my editors. So thanks for saying that. I think what I would say as a freelancer has been very helpful for me is flexibility and adaptability. I've probably worked with well over 50 editors, and every editor has their own style, and they're not going to, it's unrealistic that they're going to completely adapt their style to me. So the extent to which I can sort of adapt my style to them, I think has helped a lot. Some editors really like to jump on the phone. Some editors I've never spoken to. I have no idea what their voice sounds like, but I found that you can have productive working relationships with people in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, thanks. And then now on to Sarah. Please share your perspective and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sarah Zhang. I'm a staff writer at The Atlantic, where I cover science, and I write primarily online. I also write a little bit for the print magazine. A long time ago, I was also Lauren's intern at Nature. And I know the question was asked what was one ingredient, but I'm going to cheat a little bit and say I think one of the things that is really unique about the editor-writer relationship, it's really about two very different things that are both equally important. One is advice, which is your editor as a sounding board for ideas. You know, how do you frame a story? What is the angle for a story? How do I go about reporting it? And the second is really moral support. I think writers as a species can be pretty insecure, and we're also like taught to question and doubt and, you know, be skeptical. And I think that can sometimes fold onto the story itself. So I think sometimes writers are looking for just want to know that your editor cares about your story and like wants your story. And sometimes when writers go to an editor, it can seem like they're asking for advice, be like, oh, I have this problem, when really what they're asking for is moral support and saying that like, oh, I want you to know that I am doing this and you're not you're not sitting there like second guessing what I'm doing. So I think those are two really different things and like two really different skills, but both really important, and sometimes important to distinguish like what a writer is asking for.
Yeah, that's great. And that sort of leads into, we have a audience question. So this, I think, is more to writers, but I think we can pose it for both writers and editors. So for writers, how do you keep your ego and feelings in check when your editor sends you edits and comments you don't agree with? But I guess I'd also pose to editors, how do you, or do you anticipate feelings from your writers about those comments, and how do you give them in a way that's constructive and maybe helpful for building up your writers? Feel free to take the floor, any one of you.
I would say when I first get edits back, you will probably see some edits that like are painful to you, and you should not respond. You should like, take a deep breath, put it away for a second, and then think about it. So I think, you know, I think as a writer, you should definitely always feel empowered to push back on edits that are factual or, you know, crosses like what you think might be an ethical line. I think stylistic edits are sometimes the ones that are a little bit more in the gray area, and I think that really depends on what kind of publication you're writing for. If it's, for example, a newspaper, a very news-driven place where there's just the house style, that's just the way it's going to be. It's like, don't take the stylistic editing personally. If it's for more of a magazine, if it's for more a feature that you're working on, I think that is a place where, you know, you can kind of have a negotiation with the editor, and you can accept some edits that you feel okay with, but you can push back on others.
I think a good rule of thumb, or the way that I always try and kind of explain it to reporters, especially like when I had interns, and was kind of helping them learn how to deal with like an ongoing editor-reporter relationship, is if I change something, it's because it doesn't work in some way. And if what I do doesn't work for you, that's fine. But like, we have to find the third way together. And I think that's a pretty good rule. It just, you know, like there are problems, I think, when someone on either side of the relationship really digs in and it's not working for the other side. And I think there's almost always that third way. The other thing I would just say is, I think this is not as apparent necessarily to writers, but often as editors, we've got folks above us doing edits of our edits. So, you know, solidarity. I certainly get top edits back sometimes, and I'm just like, what the hell have they done? And sometimes, you know, and sometimes you end up going back to the reporter and saying, you know, the folks above me want to do this. Let's make it as palatable for the two of us as possible. So
I'll echo Lauren. I mean, I've often said to writers, my dream is when, you know, you don't just take the sentence that I've inserted, but you come back like you know, I usually try to put in a reason for why I'm doing, I mean, I can't do it for every single edit. For bigger edits, you put in a reason and, you know, you kind of give here's what I'm looking for. But my dream is for the writer to come back, rewrite what I've done if it doesn't work for them in their own voice. And so my dream is that third option, right? To like make the story the very best that it can be. So yeah, and answer to that, I try, you know, we have a lot on our plate, so it's not possible to do this all the time, but you try as much as possible to explain for most of the edits why you're doing what you're doing. And then that way you can kind of have a conversation about it. And I agree with Lauren that, you know, digging in on one side or the other is not usually going to be constructive.
Yeah, I always just try to keep in my head that the editor is not just making edits for no reason. That we're both, you know, working toward the same goal, which is to make the best possible story. And editors are, you know, obviously trying to sort of optimize several things at once, like clarity and maybe writing style, maybe length. So just I try very hard not to take things personally. I guess I feel like I've been able to lose some of that ego over time and just realize this is a professional thing we're doing and we just got to make it work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here's another question for editors. How do you balance your publication's tone with the writer's voice? And also for freelancers, the question is, how do you get better at doing this, at balancing those two things? So maybe Gabe, go ahead and start since I said the part about freelancers last.
Well, if you write for a place over and over, you kind of start to internalize the tone a little bit. If it's a new place, it's probably going to be something of a learning curve there. I find that I don't worry too much about that. I try to write the best story that I can the way I think it should be written, and then if it needs to be adjusted to some kind of house style or tone, then that will happen in editing. I guess that's my approach to that.
Anyone else?
I think as far as edits go, I am trying to do kind of hit that perfect balance between what I need to do to like match style and achieve clarity without, you know, rewriting everything. If you're rewriting everything, it's not really a good edit. And some of the things I look at, you know, if there's a section that I really need to go in and kind of edit directionally and rewrite, I like to look at like, you know, phrases or word choices, or just maybe the overall structure is good, but things need to be condensed and kind of preserve those elements. And I think that helps a person's voice come through. And I also think, you know, there were some elements of house style that are non-negotiable. Like when I was at Nature, we spelled like British people. We put, you know, the date kind of backwards to Americanize. There were some little quirks of grammar, and those things weren't negotiable, but kind of in a larger way, some of the structure or just like a really clever lead or something like that, you could hit the house style, but also get those nice kind of individual flourishes through.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in terms of when I think about like the style, almost as in what our readers are looking for, right? And so I feel for Gabe for working for so many different places, because it can be hard to know, you know, you're switching your brain back and forth about who you're writing for each place. But I think it's important for, you know, if it is a freelancer, but definitely staff writers, for you to like talk with your editor when you're first starting out about what they're looking for, what the audience is that you're writing for, at what level should you be writing. Like those open lines of communication are really important, just to kind of establish those things so that they know that going forward.
Yeah, and then so when things are done well, how do you give positive feedback? And maybe writers, how do you prefer to receive positive feedback, or are there things that have worked for you in writer-editor relationships that you've had in the past?
I try not to, you know, kind of save it up. I think feedback is a process. And if there are like nice little things in a story, like there's a really nice quote, or there's just a really nice sentence or a nice phrase, I like to kind of note that during the edit. And I might say something, you know, after the edit. But number one, I think it helps when you might be making other changes that the writer might struggle with. Like, it's good to point out the good stuff and not just the things that need work. And I also think it's just kind of more credible and helps people understand what you want if you're giving positive feedback where you can as you're going, instead of doing it kind of sporadically, because that can kind of feel false, even if it's not. Like you get nothing, and then out of nowhere, the editor comes and says something that you're like, what?
I would echo what Lauren said. A phrase that I've heard is like the compliment sandwich. Just when you put some criticism in between some nice thoughts. I don't think it has to be, you know, like so regimented that like every like criticism or every edit has to come with a compliment. But I do kind of value the you know, kind of organically working it into your back and forth, because you are going to have a lot of back and forth in any editing process, and just having that be a process rather than like, you know, big long feedback at the end is really helpful.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I was going to say, Sarah said earlier, all writers are insecure, I think. So all positive feedback is always welcome. But I also really value constructive criticism. And I feel like as a freelancer, I don't get as much of that as I otherwise might, just because of editors are busy. I mean, I would love to like debrief stories at the end, talk about what went well, what could have gone better. That would be so valuable. I don't know that it's ever actually happened, but yeah, as much feedback as possible, I would say.
I've had some writers ask me for feedback right after the stories come out. I think, you know, here's a tip for a writer, like if you want that feedback, you know, let the editor know you're gonna ask for it, right? Just to give them some time to think about it, instead of, you know, point blank in a phone call asking them, you know, how was my story? Because maybe they want to take some time to think about the things that they want to point out that were good and things that could be constructive. But yeah, I agree with what's been said. I mean, I think if there are things that you have in your mind that the writer needs to work on, when you see them doing it, you need to give that positive feedback right away, just to reinforce that that's what you're looking for. And also, you know, if there's something that you're starting to see that's creeping in over and over again, don't wait to give that feedback. It needs to be given as soon as possible. Now, again, we're all very busy, and so that's not possible 100% of the time, but in theory, you know, we hope that we can all do that. I would also just say that on occasion, I've gotten some positive feedback from writers saying, thank you for these smart edits. And we editors sometimes are insecure. So it's nice to hear that too. Not that I'm saying you have to do that all the time, but it can feel really good when it's really heartfelt. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's something that as the writer, I don't often think to do, but I realize that the editors put a lot of time in it and they're not getting a byline. And yeah. So we have a question from someone who's starting a remote summer internship at a newspaper soon and is wondering, because of this, won't be working with their editor in person at all. So how do you, what advice can you give for having a successful writer-editor relationship on a virtual basis? So I know, Sarah, you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. So my editor, I'm in DC and my editor is in New York, and actually she's out on maternity leave, but even usually we have almost always worked remotely. And I think the one thing that has really helped is to have like a regular check-in mechanism. So you know, like I'm going to talk on the phone every week, or we're going to check in at this point in the day, just to make sure that, you know, it's like not falling through the cracks. And if sometimes you have things you want to say, but like it's like not like important enough, they're going to pick up the phone right then to say them, but you need like an outlet to say them at some point. And I think these regular check-ins really help. I would also say like every editor, as Gabe was saying, like every editor writer is different. I feel like my editor has been really good at kind of adapting to what every different writer on my team needs, in terms of like how communicative we want to be, like how often you want to be in touch. Do you want to be on Slack or do you want to be on the phone? So I think feel free to experiment with like, you know, what makes the most sense. I have some editors who just like to talk over Slack, and I have some editors who like pick up the phone. So, you know, don't feel like there has to be exactly one type of way to communicate, and kind of experiment with what works for you.
But definitely set a habit. And I would just say for an internship, since Nature has a remote intern every spring, so I did 7 remote, you know, I kind of mentored 7 remote interns when I was there. It's really good, especially with a remote internship, to kind of go in with some goals, some near-term goals, maybe some long-term goals for the internship. Bring them up with your editor at the beginning of the internship. And then halfway through, it's, you know, if at no other point, like kind of halfway through, it's good to kind of sit down, look at where you are, maybe adjust your goals. Maybe they might have changed. Maybe you feel like you need a little extra help to get one done. But internships are for the intern more than they are for the publication in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I always really liked working with interns because they have a really sharp growth curve, and it's fun to see somebody get better fast. And I think, you know, an intern that is excited and comes with goals at the beginning of the internship is, you know, it's like an encouraging thing as an editor. So
I totally agree. I mean, we always ask our intern, what are your goals? What do you hope to get out of this? And then we try to set those goals and make sure that they achieve them. But by the time they leave, if it's getting a cover story or a feature or doing a podcast or whatever, then we try to make sure that we hit those. And I do think that the regular check-ins are really important, and just ask for it, right? I think not as an intern, but when I first started out as a reporter, I didn't think to ask my boss to have a like regular check-in, and as a consequence, but then I found out that someone else had like a weekly check-in because they asked for it, and I never realized that I should have asked for it. And so I think ask for it, and you know, I offer that to all my staff now. Sometimes people want it weekly, sometimes people want it bi-weekly, but having it on the calendar, and it's always a time that they can talk to me about whatever they want. It could be stories in the pipeline. They could just be venting about something. It could be brainstorming a story. It's like, I always let them know that it's their time to have with me, and that they get to choose what we talk about. I mean, of course, if there are things that I need to talk about with them, then I bring those up too, but that's the spirit of it.
Yeah, sort of related to that, there's a question about for people early in their career, or from your own experiences early in your career, were there things that tripped you up about editor-writer relationships, and how did you overcome those? And Gabe, why don't you start with this one?
I mean, I think I started out, quite intimidated. Not to say that has totally gone away, but yeah, I was quite intimidated by editors. Really wanted to please them and cause as little, trouble for them as possible. So I think that probably led to not doing what I think both Laurens have suggested, which is kind of pushing back on edits, or not pushing back, but sort of trying to find that third way. I think sometimes being a little bit too ready to just accept the edits that came my way. So obviously, as we're learning, we're seeing here, editors are people just like you and me, and so there's, I think, no particular reason to be intimidated by them. That at least one piece of advice I can give.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just didn't ask for feedback because I was afraid, and I was on staff. I've mostly been on staff my whole career, but I was also really afraid of talking to the folks above my editor. Don't be afraid. It is totally okay if you want to email them and see if they have time to have some coffee or whatever. Most newsrooms, this is a thing that happens, even if it's not always advertised. And also for anybody doing an internship, in addition to your editor, there are other reporters you're working with or editors who you admire in other parts of the publication. Like, ask them to have coffee. Everybody will have coffee with an intern.
All right, another question that's maybe on a similar note, but what can writers do to make editors eager to work with them again? And are there things that make an editor want to run away?
File on time. If you're not going to file on time, let your editor know as soon as possible, because our desks are basically like airports and stories are like planes and they come landing. And we don't want them to crash, but you can kind of rearrange your day if you know something might be coming in late. I'd also beg everyone to please file close to the word count, or if you think that's going to be a problem, to like flag it and have a discussion about it, because I've totally been in a situation where I commissioned 500 words and thought I wouldn't get more than 600, and I got like 1,500 words from somebody who really should know better, and that just just disrupts everything. It's 3 times as long as what you asked for. You might not have that in your budget. You might not have that if it's, you're working for a place with print, they might not have room. It creates a lot of extra work and aggro. And if it's really like a great story that deserves 1,500 words, like, tell me, and I will like make a way for it to happen. But just like, no surprises.
I will say, in following on that, I would also say try to file clean-ish copy. Like, I'm not saying 100% impeccable copy, but sometimes I have seen some pretty scary copy. Like, words are missing, people's names are spelled wrong. Like, even, I know they're spelled wrong. I'm not the expert, but facts are not correct. Things that even I recognize are not correct. I think it just kind of indicates to me the level of enthusiasm or care that was put into it. And so it should be obvious. These things should be obvious, but you would be surprised at how often you get copy that looks like this. And then I think more broadly, I would just go back to the trying to understand what audience you're writing for, so that when you're pitching or you're conceiving of a story, just, shaping it in that way, not pitching something that the magazine's already written about 100 times, like doing your homework a little bit to understand the scope of what's been written by that magazine, but also other outlets. So you're also looking for a new angle, and not trying to give the editor something that's been done in other places before.
But if a pitch doesn't, if an editor rejects a pitch, totally kosher. Ask why they rejected it if it's not clear. People sometimes are worried about that. And there's also not like a waiting period. If I reject your pitch, it doesn't mean you can't pitch me tomorrow if the pitch is good. Like, don't machine gun pitch if you have things that aren't quite ripe, but you don't have to go like hide for 6 weeks. There's no cooling off period. And it often, I think, takes, Lauren, tell me if this matches with your experience, but it sometimes takes like 2 or 3 or 4 pitches before somebody hits on kind of what a particular publication is looking for. And that's okay.
It can definitely take a little while. And, you know, I mean, even if I like the, you know, I get a pitch and I'm like, I think I like this, but I want to ask some more questions and ask the person to do a little bit more digging to really shape it into what we're looking for. I mean, it can go back and forth a couple of times. And I do appreciate that writers don't necessarily get paid for that time. I will say, depending on what it is, if I want them to do some extensive research, we do have some research fees for that. I mean, if it's just a couple of questions of back and forth. But I think just keeping that in mind as an editor is important too. But it can take a little while, but I think it's worth it because once you establish that relationship with a freelancer, you know, they don't grow on trees, at least in my experience. We're a chemistry magazine. And so, you know, it's really valuable to find people that know what you're looking for, know what stories they can pitch you, and they, you know, I want to keep that relationship with them and nurture it. So
Gabe, do you want to chime in on that from a freelancer's perspective?
Like, do you want me to say what I try to do to make editors want to work with me, or what?
Sure, yeah. And I think also if over your career there's been a shift in how you view pitching, frequency of pitching, or just your communication with editors in general.
Well, very early on, maybe even before I'd even pitched a story, I went to hear a science writer talk and do a book talk, and I went and asked him, what advice do you have? And he said, work really hard on your pitches and make them good. And I really took that to heart. I often get feedback from editors that even if they aren't taking the pitch, they might say, well, that's a really good pitch. So I think I do overwrite my pitches, but the plus is that I have a pretty high success rate of landing pitches. So I have to say that that did turn out to be good advice. There's no point in firing off half-baked pitches. You just end up wasting your time. That's, I guess, one thing I can say.
Yeah, sure. And I think there are some audience questions about that kind of tie back into communication. So I guess this is switching topics a little bit, but is there any advice that you all can give for checking on the well-being of writers or editors or other people that you're working with during, you know, difficult times? And I guess, how do you connect as people is really the question, and to what level is that important in your relationships?
I think it's important. I try to do that no matter what, because otherwise things can become really transactional and not in a good way. Like, you know, it's good to have a sense of the people you're working with as people. Like, I know them, like all my reporters for some reason right now have like cats, and I know all their names. And it's a big fixture of life right now since we're all stuck at home. But, you know, like when I was at Nature, the reporter in California, Amy Maxman, had, I don't think I'm giving too much away, likes to go to the bodega around the corner at 3 every day for a snack. And I would talk to her in the afternoons, and I always wanted like the update about what she would get, because she'd normally get red vines, and every so often she'd get something really weird. And, you know, the bodega guy ended up translating some Arabic for us once from her reporting in Jordan. So, but just like stuff like that. And then I think when things get tough, either like on a global or national level, the way they are now, or just tough for somebody like individually, it's easier to deal with. I will say that one thing I kind of have run into lately, which I didn't think about before, was that there can be kind of like discussion fatigue with some of the things going on now. And like, especially right now with the protests and the stuff about police brutality, I think with like some of my colleagues of color, they're tired of being asked how they are like all the time. And so you also want to be sensitive to that. Like sometimes people, you know, just want to talk about boring stuff, but that's also just a way of kind of checking in and seeing how they are. And you sometimes, you know, you can poke your reporters a little bit, but you know, you should also kind of take their lead and you can kind of sense how things are going, but just kind of checking in, like, I know you're there, I'm not just asking you about a story, I think is valuable.
I agree. I think that's one thing I had written down, Carolyn. You had sent a couple of like seed questions, but one was about what editors can do to foster good relationships with writers, and I just wrote down, listen to them, really listen to them.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, you know, just asking how they're doing, how their vacation was, what got them excited about the story that they're working on, why did they choose the lead that they chose, what makes them frustrated. I mean, having those conversations establishes what you're trying to establish, which is a partnership, teamwork, all of that. Show them that you care about them, not in a fake way or a checking the box way, but I mean, this is your team, and if you want to motivate them to do good work, then these are the kinds of things that you do because you care about these people. I mean, I will say I've had a manager in the past where when we would talk, I could hear them typing in the background. So clearly not listening to me, and there's nothing that will make you feel worse than that. So I've tried to never, ever do that.
Is there a way that editors can get better at doing that or cultivate some, like that seems like a skill or an awareness that people may not be born with. Yeah, are there ways that editors can be trained to be better at working with people and not just words?
I think some of it is just deciding to start and accepting that it might be awkward, at least for a while. But I also think, you know, like if you're a new manager, I'm not normally like somebody for like business books or self-help books, but like making that transition into management is one of those things where there are actually useful, non-cheesy books out there and articles, and they are worth taking a look at because some of it you can do on instinct and some of it is skill, and people like will helpfully explain it. Jill Geisler, who's with the Poynter Institute, has actually a really good book for managers, and it's divided for chapters in a way where you can read it all at once or kind of dive in for advice on specific things. And I think also just kind of keeping your eyes open and watching the other folks you work with and stealing all of their best tricks.
Absolutely, I agree with all of that. And I think I don't know personally, I think that there are probably some pretty good podcasts if that's your medium of choice now that you can listen to these days. So if anyone out there has suggestions on that, please put them in the chat for everyone. But yeah, I think you just have to decide, you know, get some training and decide that this is something that's important, because I think universally no one will tell you, you know, ignore your staff and don't ask them how they're doing, right? But there are some people that are pretty not great at it.
Oh, so one more thing. So other Lauren started like a little group of editors, and we have breakfast every month and we kind of talk about editing. And like, I feel like if you're an editor, you can feel like you're on an island, but like honestly, finding a little group of people to kind of compare notes with is really helpful. And I'd say go for it. We were a little awkward when we started, but now I look forward to it.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, I think there's probably less opportunities out there for editors to get that kind of training, maybe. I don't know. At least that's my perception. I think, you know, there's Poynter and some things like that, but there's not as many workshops for editors to learn how to edit or just learn how to deal with the things that you suddenly have put upon you when you become a manager and you never realize are things that you would ever have to learn how to do. So I think that is definitely a reason why I started the group. I think it's just nice to have that community and have other people to talk with about problems that come up. I mean, I've heard of lots of freelance groups and writer groups too, and I think they're all really great.
I think for the writer side, I also want to ask, so I had some editing relationships that were not great in my early years at my first internship, and I had remembered asking a group of other trainees and the managing editor, like, what is a good writing, what does a good editing relationship actually look like? And so his description was that it was like they're helping tune your voice, kind of like eliminating the fuzz on a radio when you turn the dial. But I was wondering, writers, if you have something similar, like what does a good editing relationship look like? And then I will have a follow-up question about when it's not so good.
I think I really like what both Laurens talked about, finding the third way, or like the middle way, because I think a lot of times, especially when you're starting out as a writer, when an editor makes an edit, you can think, oh, okay, that's the correct way. When in fact, like, there actually may be a better way if you figure it out together. And I actually really appreciate it when editors do kind of insert a sentence saying what they want there, and I might not like the way they wrote that sentence, but it gives me a way to like figure out, oh, what is the idea they want there, and how can I make it like flow smoothly in a way that both of us can live with. So I think it really is helpful to think of editing as a partnership. And you know, Carolyn, I know you said like there is definitely a power dynamic, but I think a good editor will always want to work with you because you're both of you are working towards the same goal, which is to write a really good story.
As a freelancer, I would definitely love to have more opportunities to talk with editors when it's not just like, all right, we're working on this one story and then we're trying to get it done, but sort of more kind of learn about what we're each interested in and try to find more opportunities to do stories that don't just always have to come from me. I know maybe that's unrealistic. I guess the other thing I'll just make a plug as a freelancer is that I really hate like having to ask for more money. And anytime an editor can just say, hey, you've done some good work for us, how about a raise? That's just so wonderful.
But you probably have to ask anyways.
I started out, like when I started out, oh, here's another answer to the question of what I did wrong. I mean, probably like a lot of writers, I was just like happy to have any place accept anything I wanted to write. So it didn't occur to me to ask for more money. Then I started hearing from people or seeing tweets or whatever that you can ask for more money. And I ignored that for a while because it just seemed so awkward and scary. But finally I took the advice and it actually works about half the time. And no one's ever offended. They might just say, no, we can't do that right now. But yeah. Again, there have been times when I got a raise, like not a huge raise, but was just someone said, we want to up your rate. And I mean, that's just, again, it's just like, that's just golden.
I would say ask. Gabe is absolutely right. And sometimes when I was commissioning freelancers, if the budget was tight in a way where I couldn't give somebody a rate increase right away, I'd like kind of make a note and revisit it. And you can also ask for more money on specific stories if for some reason they warrant it. If you're helping out with a graphic or it's just more difficult reporting for the word count, it's going to be, and don't be afraid to ask on like a per story basis, especially if the publication tells you they can't raise your overall rate. You should see if you can get a bump for an individual story, because that'll go a long way. And if there's some assignments you're not taking from a place because the rate for that doesn't work out, tell them, because sometimes the editor you're working with doesn't have ultimate control and they can take that up the chain and be like, hey, Gabe's not going to write this section for us anymore. And then that greases the wheels.
All right, so here's another audience question. What steps can you take as an editor to attract pitches from journalists from underrepresented minorities and foreign journalists? Yeah, foreign journalists.
I tried to do that when I was at Nature, and I went looking on Twitter. I went looking around. I kind of did the editor equivalent of cold calling people. And what I found is that when you start publishing more diverse writers or people from a bigger set of countries, other people who fall into those categories will notice and start pitching you. And on the internships, I tried to kind of reach out beyond the traditional science journalism programs to journalism programs at schools that have like strong ethnic diversity, or like HBCU kind of programs, things like that. I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be, but I, you know, I feel like it's kind of incumbent on us to reach out. You can put something on Twitter and say, hey, I'm looking for more of this, but that's really passive, and you're going to get further if you like make up a list and start going after people at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with what Lauren said. I mean, I think it's hard work, right? It's more work, but it's important work. And I'm not saying anybody's perfect at it. We've had many discussions about how to expand our freelance pool and make it more diverse, and whether we can go to, you know, when we go to the meetings and go to meet and greets with freelancers, following up with some of those writers that were really interested in trying to nurture those relationships. But also, as Lauren mentioned, trying to go to some of these other broader meetings, you know, Association of Black Journalists, Asian American journalists, you know, things that maybe we wouldn't normally go to because it's outside of the science journalism realm. But I think expanding our purview and trying to like find people in those places is important too.
Yeah, there's been a couple of questions that sort of got buried from before, but these are back to some of the nitty-gritty of interacting around pieces of or articles that writers have submitted. So how do you handle disagreements on edits, and who actually owns the piece, or who has the final say? Is it the writer, the editor? And then there's also a question about, do you simply just, as the writer, do you have to simply just accept all the edits, or do you, is it okay to override them or reject them, and what's the best way to do that? So I think we've already touched on that a little bit, but yeah.
I mean, I would just say again, you know, it should be a conversation. I would hope that you wouldn't push back on every single edit, right? I mean, that will get tiresome, and you won't be able to get things done very quickly if you push back on every single thing. But if there are things that you think are important, then you certainly should, and explain it. You know, I think as an editor, I don't ever go into a piece and think, I'm the expert here, I could have written this better, right? I think if you start doing that, then you're in a lot of trouble. The reporter is the person who's the expert. They're the, you know, if you did your job and you did development with them, you know, they should be able to answer your questions, right? And if they don't have the answer, they come back to you with it. But I think, you know, there has to be some trust there and some working together to come to the best piece that it can be.
I think that's the case. And I will say, like, when you're an editor, in some sense, you are like the captain of the story in some ways. You're taking care of the logistics. You might be clearing a path with editors above you who are going to be reading it. So you're like, you know, the advocate for the story. And you're like safeguarding the house style and making sure there are no conflicts and making sure things are sourced. So in some way you kind of, you are the arbiter in a lot of ways, but I would never want someone to feel like their story is not their story at the end of it. And I think if a change is something somebody doesn't understand, or they think it, you know, just isn't right in some way, it is always a conversation. I do think one pitfall you see a lot in science journalism is when you're working with a writer who knows a ton about an area, but they know so much that they write it in a way that is just really overly technical. And I think sometimes that can break down into the writer saying, you're trying to make it wrong. And the editor is basically saying, I'm trying to make you understandable. And that's kind of one to look out for on both sides, because there are ways to preserve nuance or write things in a simpler way without, I don't know, losing all of the complexity. But that's just perennially a good one to watch out for and realize when it's happening, because that can go bad pretty quickly. But there is almost always a way, kind of if you're a writer and you're trying to figure out how to deal with your editor making a change you don't like, my best tip, and this is one I use when I get like top edits from other editors, think about the problem that they thought they were addressing and then tell them a better way to address it. Like, use a little like reverse psychology.
I will also say that when I push back on edits, I always give a like fairly detailed reason why. And I think sometimes when you write that, sometimes you realize, oh, actually this is just an ego thing and I don't actually have a reason. And like being forced to do that kind of lets you figure out which ones those are. And I think also, editors, they just, maybe you want to make an edit for a reason that an editor doesn't see yet, or maybe like you have some bit of reporting that you didn't put in your story, but like that has some bearing on the reason why this edit doesn't work. Just explain it, and I think most editors will understand.
I would say I actually love that. I have some writers who will put like overset at the bottom of their stories sometimes, like quotes that they actually cut out themselves to make, get it to the word count that you wanted. Or, if I've asked a question, they'll put a long explanation. And sometimes those are really useful. And we end up pulling some of those things back into the story, and it adds some really cool things to it. So I think, turn your stories in at the length that they're supposed to be, but you're the expert, and giving that information to the editor can be really useful. Like, as we've been saying, it's a conversation.
A related question. So as a freelancer, how do you provide tough feedback when you don't like the way they handle the piece, but you still want to work with that publication again?
I've only had 2 really bad editing experiences. And in both cases, I decided I didn't want to work with them again. It just wasn't worth it. So I can't recall a time where I had to provided tough feedback, but I think over the years, I've definitely gotten more confident in, if I see something that an editor's done that I don't like, to just say, basically, make a different suggestion for how I want to do this and explain why, and not worry so much about bruising someone's ego or making them angry or anything. Just, again, that assumption that we're both in this for the same reason, which is to make this story as good as it can be. And as far as I can tell, I haven't pissed anyone off or broken a relationship or anything in doing that.
I think always assuming positive intent on both sides is really important. Sometimes in a very difficult situation, you assume positive intent until you have to stop assuming it, because things have gone so horribly wrong. But I think that's where everybody should always start.
And I would say, Lauren mentioned earlier, good freelancers are like gold. So if there's some aspect of how the editing process that works at a certain place, or how you're interacting with an editor, just bring it up. And if you feel awkward, one good way to frame it is how can we work together better? That's a positive frame. No one's going to feel attacked. They're going to be like, wow, this person wants to work with me more. It's a really good way in where you can start the conversation without having to water down your concerns, but you're also not hey, I need to talk about what happened because it sucked. The compliment sandwich works on editors too. You can weaponize it against us.
That's great. That actually answers an audience question about what to do when you're unhappy, and how do you share that. So yeah, that's great. As writers, how do you go about stating what your communication preferences are? And then if things with your editor or manager aren't going super well, how do you manage up?
I guess I could take a stab. I don't think I've ever, that I can recall, expressed a communication preference, except that so far I've managed to avoid ever using Slack. Probably like laughable to people who work on staff, but I really adapt. I kind of go with the flow. If an editor wants to talk, I talk, and if they want to do email, then I do email. That's, I guess, the basic answer.
Yeah, I think maybe a staff writer, the situation is slightly different because you probably are like slightly more empowered with your editor, and they are also invested in having a long-term relationship with you. I would say if something is not working, like break it up. And I think this is where having regular check-ins and having like a regular review process, which hopefully where you work does, like those kind of give a like less freighted avenue to have those discussions, because it's not like you're not like, hey, I need to talk about this thing that sucks. It's like actually what you're supposed to be talking about. So I think having a like regular communication loop where you can, I think also it's really important to bring up the small things before they fester and turn into really large things. So just having the kind of posture where a writer can go to you with small things so they can kind of diffuse quickly and easily in the beginning is really important.
The freelancers, I would say, like, I always found it helpful when someone would say, like, you know, I'm available between 1 to 4 today, but like after that, I'm going to be like making dinner for my kids, or I teach class on Tuesday afternoons. Or in one case, I remember somebody filed a story and I was going to have maybe last minute questions the next day after a top read. And the freelancer was like, I'm going hiking. I'm going to be on a mountain, but I should have cell reception. So just put it in an email. But like not a Word document, please. And, you know, he ended up answering questions from the middle of the hike, and that's okay because I like knew what he needed. Those are all like small adjustments, and I feel like sometimes if writers don't ask for them, it can turn into a situation where you feel like put upon because you feel like, oh my God, the editors just emailed back and they want stuff right away. But you can set boundaries at the beginning. And you should.
Yeah, it sounds like just being really clear about communication and not letting things fester is really important.
Yeah, because we can juggle stuff a lot of the time. And, you know, if I know I've got somebody who's got to go make chicken nuggets or something for their 4-year-old at 5 o'clock, I'll get to their story first if I can.
Yeah, I think we have time for just maybe 1 or 2 last small questions. So here's one for new writers. What's a good phrase that you've used or seen when you're asking for more money? And editors, feel free to answer from your past experience or from what you've seen as well.
Can I talk to you about my rate?
Oh, like actually.
Yeah, what's the phrasing?
I just try to make it very direct, like, and if I think, sometimes I will, if they're offering a low rate, I'll just say like, look, the places I write for are typically within this range. I don't necessarily expect them to come up to that range, but at least hopefully in that direction.
I think this is a tip maybe for anybody who's asking for more money. And, you know, as women, we've probably had to ask for more money, or hopefully we did, even though we didn't know that we were making less than other people. But I think always framing it in what service you are bringing to that editor or that manager or the magazine, whatever, framing it in like, this is what I'm doing for you. This is how much I think I, you know, deserve to be paid more. I think putting it in that context is always, so for freelancer, I think it's, I've done these stories for you, you know, we've established this relationship, you know, this 1, 2 or 2 stories did gangbusters for you. I would do more of that work for you, but I'd really like to be paid a little bit more in accordance with my value to you. So,
and you can also say like, you know, I've noticed that like the stories that I'm doing for you are more involved and they require more work. And, you know, if an editor turns you down and you feel like you still want to keep working with them, you can say like, okay, if you don't mind, I'm going to check back in a couple of months on this and maybe we can talk again. Totally fine. Sometimes you have to ask twice.
But I'll say, like, if you don't ask, it's never going, it's not that it's never going to happen, but it can't hurt to ask. So
think of yourself as a small business, because you are. And it's, totally fine to say like, I'm just not going to meet like my billing target doing all this stuff for you at this rate.
We'll take one more audience question and then we'll have all the panelists give one final thought. So this question is, do editors approach their pitches or the editing process differently when the writer is early in their career or later in their career? Basically, how do you treat writers across the spectrum of experience?
it's a good question. I mean, I think, people who are just starting out are going to need a little bit more, I don't want to say hand-holding, that sounds kind of patriarchal, but, like they need a little bit more attention. They need more, you to explain things a little bit more of what you're looking for than you might with a more experienced staff member. But I think, the elements of a story are going to be the same no matter who that person is. And so you should be asking the same types of questions. But maybe just with the earlier career staff people, not assuming that, they know this thing about, how to do this interview with this, tough source or something like that. You might want to talk them through that a little bit more.
Yeah, or just like the mechanics of being on staff or being freelance. I think with early career people, like my philosophy is like, nobody should be at a disadvantage because they don't know something about like how the culture of science journalism works, like maybe because they didn't go to a program or just because they've come from other like part of journalism. And if I kind of get the sense that it's something like that, I might just offer them some advice or explain something, or just on process, not, maybe sometimes on the journalism, but I find like it's more like just on the mechanics of things. Like I'm probably more apt, or when I was hiring freelancers, was more apt to say to like a newbie, like, thanks for this pitch, it didn't work for me because, but like, please pitch again, I want to see more. Like to really like encourage them more, because people at the beginning of their careers are more reticent about trying you again.
Okay. Well, I think we're about at the time to stop. So panelists, does anyone want to give us any closing words? Anything to take home?
Well, I can we haven't talked very much about pitching, but since there are so many freelancers, and I think it is sometimes a mysterious process, I would just say when you're pitching a new editor, so in other words, you're kind of reaching out, you're saying, I want to start a relationship. I think one thing that I've heard from many editors, and it seems to work well for me, is just, and this has been said a little bit, but you want to read their publication. You want to kind of know what it is that they do, and then you want to somehow put yourself in the mind of, what would my story look like? What would I expect it to look like if I read it in this publication, and then write your pitch in that way. And I think when editors see that's what you've done, it seems to me that they are, quite receptive to the pitch, and they may not take it, but at least they will certainly give it consideration and get back to you.
And ask if there's a pitch guide.
I'm sorry?
And ask if there's a pitch guide. At Nature, we had one, and for whatever reason, we could never get permission to put it on the website, but it was totally available if you asked for it.
Yeah, similarly, we put one together. We have kind of like a quick sheet for just like basic info, but then also a very, very long and deep, if you're freelancing for us, here's all the things that you need to know. Here's how to pitch. Here's the things we're looking for in a pitch, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists for sharing all your insight. The next Professional Development Month panel will be about curating Instagram stories, and it'll be organized by Monica Sharda. So that'll be at 7 p.m. next Tuesday. You can sign up for it on DCSWA, on the DCSWA website. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good night. Take care.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Bye guys,
Bye.
thanks.